Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club. Longtime loyal viewers will know that I live in the state of Michigan here in the United States. I actually live in the southeast corner. If you think of Michigan as being like your hand, I live outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the University of Michigan is, where I work for my day job. And so I really love Michigan, and we moved here in 2009, which was kind of at the peak of the last economic crisis to grip the nation before the COVID pandemic. And so Michigan, we've seen always being very sensitive to economic changes in the broader country and kind of the broader world. And so that has been highlighted in the last few years coming out of the pandemic with really high levels of inflation. And so I was particularly caught by an article that was published by Bridge, Michigan. Bridge, Michigan is an online newspaper that is nonpartisan and nonprofit. It's a, I think, really nice local source of news here in Michigan. And they had an article called Fact Checking the Michigan Economy, Prices Up, So Are Wages. What is true? And so as kind of a critic, both of these can be true. Prices can both be up and wages be up, right? So anyway, headline writing aside, this article was pretty interesting. And Bridge, Michigan has a lot of really good data journalism that they publish, and you can kind of see some of these figures as I go through here. They tend to use visuals that have interaction and tooltips that pop up whenever you highlight over something. And so the plot I was interested in was this one, Michigan wages increase. And so back in the middle of October, shortly after this article was published, I wrote a commentary about this in the newsletter that I send out to my subscribers. So if you're not subscribed to that newsletter, down below in the description, you can find a link to that specific email about this figure, as well as a way to subscribe to my newsletter. And so what were the things that captivated me about this figure? So again, it's a bar plot that shows wages increasing over the time between 2017 and 2023, kind of straddling the pandemic. I really liked actually having these numbers, like the $46,709, embedded in the bar. A lot of times what you'll see is this number being kind of put at the top of each of the bars. And so I thought it was kind of cool to have it be embedded in the bar. Now, you do have to crane your neck to see what that number is, but I thought that was interesting, and I wondered how one might go about doing that. The other thing I noticed was that the y-axis labels were on their grid line, right? And so I thought that was interesting, right? Also, I noticed that with ggplot2, we typically have a tick mark on the x-axis at least that corresponds to the middle of each of the categorical variables. So in this case, each bar is being treated as a categorical variable for each of the years. And so I would normally have expected to see a tick at the middle of each of these bars, right? Instead, if you will, we see ticks between the years, right? And we see the years centered right under each of their bars. And so I thought that was interesting too. Something I thought was a little bit odd, and perhaps due to their software, is that they have a legend. So they have a legend for one treatment group, median earnings, right? And so how would you get a legend for one thing in ggplot2? I don't know. But more interesting than that, perhaps, was that they had a round plotting symbol for that legend, whereas in ggplot2, if you make a bar plot like this, you're going to get a rectangle, not a circle. So I was curious if I could get a circle instead of a rectangle, okay? And so there are a variety of other things along the way that I thought were interesting in this plot, but those were the main things. And so what I want to do today is to do my best to recreate this figure as faithfully as I can using ggplot2. Here in RStudio, I have a wages.r script that's got some starter code. Basically, I'm loading the tidyverse as well as creating a mi wages tibble that has the years as well as the earning values that were shown in each of those columns. And so these are the actual data. If you want to get this code as well as all of the code that I generate in today's episode, go down below in the description. You'll find a link to a blog post for today's episode that you can go to and get all of my code. I'm going to go ahead and run everything. And that, again, loads the tidyverse as well as mi wages. And we can see, of course, that that is a rather simple data frame. So I want to start by making a basic version of this plot without any extra ornamentation. Let's start by making the bar plot as well as bringing in all of the different labels. And so we can do that by taking mi wages, and we'll pipe that to ggplot AES for our mappings. So we'll map the year column to X, And then the y-axis will get the earnings column. And then we'll do geom_col. This gives us our column plot. And one thing you'll notice from this view is that there's no data for 2020. And so sure enough, 2020 is missing. I'm not totally sure why that is missing. I suspect it's from the pandemic. And so perhaps the data from that year was pretty erratic and just not trustworthy. Although I do find this to be sneaky. Very few readers are going to read these years in such detail to notice that 2020 was missing. It took me a while to notice actually that year was missing myself. So this is something we'll have to deal with, and perhaps in my next episode, we'll find a way to deal with having that gap in time and finding a better way to show that gap in time. But for now, this is a pretty good bar plot. Someone pointed out to me in the comments to a previous video that I can do the same thing by doing geom bar, and I can do stat equals identity, and you'll see that gives us the exact same plot. And so I prefer to use geom_col because it's less typing, and it's just kind of what I always use. And so we'll stick with geom_col, but know that you can use geom bar with stat equals identity as well. All right, so now we want to add in the labels for the x and y axis. So we'll use the labs function. X doesn't have any label on it, and so we'll then do null y. The y axis says med period earnings full-time workers. So we'll do med earnings full-time workers, and that needs a space. And so again, we got rid of that x-axis label, and we now have the y-axis label. We also want to add a title, and we're also going to add a subtitle. And so I'm going to go ahead and take Michigan wages increase, and I can copy and paste that in here. And then for my subtitle, we'll go ahead and see if we can copy and paste this as well. Sure enough, we can. And that goes way off the screen. So let's go ahead and put in some line breaks here so things don't go all the way off the side of the screen. And this gives us kind of a weird overhang here. That's probably because this is tabbed over. If I remove that tab, then that gives us the nice left justified. But of course, it's going off the right side of the screen as well. The other thing this plot has is a caption in the bottom. And so I'm going to go ahead and copy that into my plot. And so we can add that with caption. All right. And so now we see that that shows up in the bottom. I'll go ahead and save that with ggsave, and I'll do wages.png. So I've previously seen that the width should be 4.88 and the height should be 8 to have the same aspect ratio as what they have. And so again, we have the same aspect ratio, but we have a fair bit of work to do to make ours look more like theirs. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and fix the x-axis. So I'm going to remove 2020, and I want to get each of the bars to have their own year label. I'll go ahead and remove that gap by making my year a categorical. We're basically going to take it from being a continuous quantitative variable to being a discrete categorical variable. And I will wrap this vector for a year in as.character. And so that will turn those into being character type. And so now when I look at mi wages, I see that I've got year and earnings, but instead of year being a double, it's a character type, okay? And so now when I run this, I now see that I no longer have that gap between 2019 and 2020, and then I have these labels across the x-axis. So again, we're trying to get their version of the plot to emerge from our version of the plot. So the next thing I want to do is to change the color of the bars. Pretty sure this color is dark red. And so I'm not sure if I should do fill equals dark red. So that works, right? But I'm also wondering if I could take this out. So if I use an aesthetic to color it, I could perhaps do fill equals median. And that gets me a fill color, right? And that then links it to a legend. And so I think that's the way that I want to go. And so instead of hard coding it, if you will, within geom_col, we'll go ahead and put it here in the aesthetics. Now, I don't want that salmon color. I want that dark red color. And so here, after geom_col, maybe what I'll do scale fill manual, and then we'll do values equals dark red. And there we go. We now have our colored bars along with our legend. Don't need the fill to have a title. And so I'll come back up to my labs. I'll do fill equals null. So then that got rid of the title for the legend, and that I have median in here. And I'm noticing that they had median earnings. So maybe instead of median, I'll put median earnings, so I don't have to worry about changing the variable. So we'll do median earnings. And so that looks like we want it. I do think we want it up at the top though. So let's go ahead and move it to the top. So we can do that with theme. And so we can do legend.position, and we can then say top, and that puts our legend up at the top, much like theirs. Cool. So we slowly see the plot emerging to be a lot like what they have. So I've gone into using theme, but one thing I notice is that they don't have this gridded background like we do for our default theme style, which is theme gray. So let's go ahead and put it into theme classic. That will at least get us a solid x-axis and get us a clear background. So before I run theme, I need to say theme classic. All right, so that gets us, again, a white, clean background. And the next thing that I want to take on perhaps are these titles, because the titles look a lot different than what they have here. So, of course, the sizes are a bit different, and we'll get to that. But one thing I'm noticing is that our title is left justified on the axis line rather than on the overall plot. So it's justified on the panel rather than the plot. We can do plot.title.position, and then we can say plot, and that then left justifies our titles to the left side of the plotting window. The other thing that we can use is ggtext. So if we do library ggtext, there is a text box that we can use, and I'm totally spacing on the syntax. So if I come down to the prompt, I'm going to do ggtext, and I think it's element text box simple. That's what I want. Okay, and whatever it gives me. I didn't put the question mark, but you could put the question mark to get the help. But what I want is that element text box simple. And so what we'll do then would be plot.title equals element text box simple, and we'll also do plot.subtitle equals element text box simple. And what that will do is to naturally wrap the text within that text box. And so now we no longer see that overhanging indent. And what I like about that actually is that allows me to clean up my my code here. So I'm going to do that really quick because I get a little bit OCD about these things, and I just want things to look nice. All right, so now we have that, and we can make the title bold, right? And so let's go ahead and do that. So that would be in plot title, and we can say face equals bold. We get a bolded title. We can make it bigger, right? And so we can say like size equals, let's say 50. Okay, that's too big. Let's knock that down to say 30. And I think that's pretty good size. We're dealing with a sans serif font where they have a serif font. And so back in here, we could also then do family equals serif. And so now we see we have a serif font like they do, but it makes it a little bit smaller. And you're probably used to me now kind of fiddling with these values, but I think that looks pretty good. The line height is a little bit different, that we've got a little bit more space between our lines than they do. And so we could come in here and do line height equals 1, and that tightens it up a bit. I think their font is a little bit smaller than ours. So I'll go to 35, and I think that looks pretty good. Of course, their font is a little bit different than ours, but we'll save that for later. Then the subtitle is a bigger font as well, although theirs, again, is a sans serif font. So let's see about increasing that font size. And so here, we'll then do size equals 20. Okay, so that's probably too big. So let's go down to 18. We could probably shrink the line height again. And so we'll do line height equals 1. And I think that looks pretty good. There is a bit of a margin between the two. And so maybe in element text box simple, we could do margin equals margin top. Let's put that to 10. And that brings it down a smidge. And I'm just going to take it up to 8. And I think 8 would probably be good enough. And so now we see that our title and our subtitle are the same size. And there's subtle differences in font, but I'm not going to worry about it so much. I think we're in good shape. Let's think about the caption at the bottom. Theirs is left justified. Mine is right justified. So let's go ahead then, and we'll come in here and we'll do plot.caption. And they also have a position. So we're going to do plot caption position plot. And we're going to then do plot.caption and then element text. We don't need text box simple, so because it's not overly long. And then we'll do hjust equals 0 for being left justified. So of course that pulls it over to the right. And again, it's left justified on the overall plot. But theirs appears to be bolded and a bit bigger than ours. Theirs seems to be a little bit smaller than their subtitle font. So we'll come in here and we'll do face equals bold, size equals 15. And I got my quotes a little bit screwed up here. All right, so I think that's a little bit too big at 15. Let's take it down to 14. And I think that's pretty good. So we now have our titles and our caption looking the way we want. I'm happy with that. Now we want to think about our axes and this legend. Let's start with the legend, kind of going from top to bottom, and because it's just right in front of me as I look at my screen, it's what I'm thinking about. So let's start with the theming in the appearance of the text. Theirs is bolded, and I'm going to say it's about the same size as the caption at that 14-point font, right? So we'll go ahead and do legend.text equals element text, and we'll do face equals bold, size equals 14. That's nice and bolded. I think that looks pretty good. Now what we want to think about is this plotting symbol. Again, I have it as a square, and theirs is a circle. And so this is called a glyph. And I'm kind of spacing on how it is changed. I think it can be changed in geom_call. So if we look at the help for geom_call, I'm kind of looking through here for any information on glyphs. So if I go into the find in topic and look for a glyph, there is the key glyph argument on layer may be passed on through the ... All right, and so where is this? This is part of the triple dots. So the triple dots, when you see that kind of in the usage statement for any of these geoms or any other functions, are additional arguments that you can pass through. They're not used directly by the geom or the function itself. And so let's see what this says. So again, where was it? The key glyph argument of layer may also be passed on through. So I guess layer is using key glyph. So let's look at key glyphs. All right, key glyphs for legends. And I don't know. So it's a grid grob. We saw that in an episode or two ago. And so as I kind of look at these examples, I see that there's a key glyph time series. And so if I look back here, I see there's a draw key time series. And so maybe I can give key glyph time series or point right here, right? That's what I want to use, right? So currently, I think it's using rect. So I'm just kind of looking back through these. So let's go ahead and use key point. So again, if we come up to geom_call, so we can do key glyph equals point. And so that got rid of the symbol. And so I think what we need to do is come back to scale fill manual. So we can override the plotting symbol, which we're clearly doing by giving it a different glyph than like the rect that would normally be using for geom_call. So we can do guide equals guide legend, and then we'll do override.aes equals, and that's going to take a list where we're going to give it the shape and the size. So let's do shape equals 21, size equals 3. Aha! And we got our plotting symbol. What do you know? And again, we use 21 because the color or the fill changes the interior of that plotting symbol. And so let's go ahead and make that a bit bigger to match theirs better. And so we can come back up here and let's make this 5. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe we can go up to 6, and I think 6 will be a size that we'll be happy with. Good. I think that's a nice sized circle. And so now what we've done is we've added a circle to our legend when normally it would be showing rectangles, right? I don't know why I'd want to do this. in this case, again, because there's only one category for fill colors, but whatever. This is good. So the next thing is I kind of look from top down in this plot is to go ahead and add in the values, right, into these different bars. And so their bars are a bit tighter than mine. And so since we were working with geom_col, let's go ahead in here and let's do like width equals 0.6. And I think that gives us a tighter appearance to our bars. And so I think that's good. So let's now go ahead and think about adding in that text. And the reason I wanted to make it narrow was because we're gonna have to think about the size of the text that we're putting in those bars. So let's come in here, and we want the geom to go on top of the column. And so we'll do geom_text. So we need to think about the label. So the label is going to be the earnings. So we'll do label equals earnings. And the X is going to be the same, but the Y is going to be 0. So let's do Y equals 0 in geom_text. And then angle, let's make that 90 because it's not going to be horizontal, it's going to be vertical. Very cool. We now have it there, but of course it's centered on the text. And so we want it to be left justified on the text. This always gets me thrown off because I can't remember if the left justified, it should be when it's horizontal or when it's vertical. If it's vertical, it should be vertical justified. So we're gonna experiment. So let's do hjust equals 0 to get to be left justified. And that worked pretty nicely. But I think 0 is probably too far down. So let's maybe move up a bit. And let's try 100. And that moved ever so slightly that I can't even see it. Let's try taking it up from 100 to 1,000. Yeah, and that moved it up perceptibly up. It's black. We want it to be white. So let's go ahead and change that. And so we can make that in here with geom_text. So we'll do color equals white. And now we've got our white text in there. It needs to be a bit bigger. And so we'll come back up here and we'll do size. So we've got size and size unit. Let's go ahead and do size equals 15. And we can do size.unit equals pt to make it in point size. And so that's a bit bigger. So we can probably make it just a smidge smaller. I had done 15 and I think it's 14. All right, I don't know that anyone can tell the difference. But what we need to do now is to convert this into a currency-like format. And we've seen this previously that there's a scales package that I think will allow us to do that. And I'm gonna go back up to my MI wages and I'm going to add a pretty column. And that will be the pretty label. And so then my label will be pretty instead of earnings, right? And so to do that, let's go ahead and do scales and then currency, label currency. And so we'll do label currency on earnings. And so it's telling me that pretty is a function. And so I think if I look at the help for label currency, format numbers as currency, rounding values to monetary or fractional monetary unit using a convenient heuristic. And so I'm noticing that label currency doesn't actually take a value. And so I think it's commonly used with labels for like axes, right? Like axis text. And so I want to kind of scroll down here and see if it says anything. So it returns a labeling function, right? And it's used for scales. All right, so I think what I'd rather do is this will return a function, and the function I want to apply to earnings. So we're basically going to pass earnings into the function that's created here, okay? So I think this should work. Let's give it a shot and see. No error messages, that's good. And so sure enough, we now see that we've got this pretty column that is the currency formatted version of earnings. Good, so now we have our text in here. And again, kind of working our way down. Trust me, we'll get back to the y-axis. I'm now looking down here at the x-axis and that we have this space between 0 and the bottom axis line. And so we want to get rid of that space. That space is part of what's called expansion, that when we look at like scale x continuous or scale y continuous or chord Cartesian, it will add expansion around the data. And so let's go ahead and turn off the expansion on the y-axis. So we'll come back up, and I like to put my scales together. So here we'll do scale y continuous, and we'll do expand equals c 0, 0. And so now our bars are sitting on the line, which is good, but we don't go up to 60,000, right? And so now we want to add a limit. We'll do limits 0 to 60,000. Maybe we'll do 61,000. But 1,000 gets us a little bit of space up here at the top. But now we see that we've got the 60,000 line like we did in the original plot. That all looks good. And now that the bars do sit on our x-axis line. Let's go ahead and clean up the x-axis. We'll get rid of those tick marks, and let's make our text bigger. I think it is the same size, maybe even bigger than our caption. So we'll get rid of those tick marks by doing axis.ticks.x and do element blank. Those tick marks are gone. Now we need to make the font bigger. And so we'll then do axis.text.x equals element text. And we'll do size equals 15. And we'll do face equals bold. I think that looks good. If we zoom in on our text, we'll see it's a different shade than the caption, and that's because it's not black for some reason. So let's go ahead and do color equals bold. Shouldn't be color equals bold, should be color equals black. All right, so now we've got our black text, and that's in a good position. So now what I'm thinking about are these tick marks between the years. So I think I'm going to draw those in using annotate. So we can do annotate with segments. And so let's do that after our geom text, and we'll do annotate, we'll use the geom segment, and then our x is going to be, well, I always forget where 1 is. So let's do like 1 through 6, and we'll see where that puts us. And then our x end will also be 1 through 6, and then our y will be 0, and our y end might be, well, this is going to be a couple thousand, right? That's probably 2,000 down. So we'll do minus 2,000. And then because we're going to draw something outside of the plotting window, we need to add chord Cartesian. And we'll say clip equals off. So clip equals on, turns off stuff or clip stuff that's outside of the plotting window. Off allows you to plot stuff outside the plotting window. All right, so we got some warnings. Remove 6 rows containing missing values or outside the scale range. That's worrisome. So we have limits defined within scale y continuous. So I'm going to move that limit down into my chord Cartesian. So I'll do ylim equals that, but I can get rid of this limits. And so scale y continuous uses those limits and removes anything that's outside of the limits. And so that's what that warning message is about. Whereas chord Cartesian doesn't remove stuff. It just doesn't show it, right? There we go. Now we have our lines, and sure enough, 1 through 6 are the actual bars. And so I think if we do like 0.5 to 6.5, then we'll get the tick marks to fall in between. And we also need those tick marks to be a bit longer. So let's come back up here to annotate. And we'll do seek 0.5 to 6.5 by 1. And we'll use the same thing for x end. We'll paste that in. And I said I want it to be a little bit longer. Let's go down to 5,000. So that now has that dropping down. It's too far. So let's go back to 4,000, and that will hopefully be good enough. 4. And I think that looks pretty right on. All right. Good. One thing I noticed is that they do have this horizontal line separating the caption from the x-axis labels. So I think I can add that also with annotate. So let's do that. So we'll come back up here. We'll do another annotate with segment. And let's get that pop out of the way. All right. So x is going to go from, let's say we'll have x go from like -1, x end. Let's go to 6.5. And then our y is going to be, let's say, minus 4,500. And y end will be minus 4,500. Let's see what that works. And we can always adjust, right? All right. So that is that right where we want it, but it's added something to our x-axis, right? And so we need to add our x-axis limit to chord Cartesian as well. So we can then do xlim equals c1 to 6. So that looks pretty good. I think it extends back a little bit too far. So let's have it perhaps go with a minus 0.8. Nope, that didn't do it. Let's do minus 0.5. And I think that looks actually pretty nice. So I'm thinking that we might have too much space on the left and right side of our x-axis, but let's wait to worry about that until after we deal with our y-axis. One thing I might deal with though is the margin on top of my caption, because it seems a little bit close to that horizontal line. So we can come back to plot caption, and then we'll add to this margin and use the margin function with t, and let's do 10. Yeah, and that puts a little bit of spacing between the top of the caption and that horizontal line. Let's now turn to our y-axis, and let's start with the title because I think that's going to be easier. And let's go ahead and we'll make it bold and I think a little bit bigger. And so we'll then do axis.title.y element text. And let's do size equals 13, face equals bold. So I think that looks pretty good. Now what we can do is turn our attention to the y-axis. So let's start by adding the grid lines at 20, 40, and 60. So we can do that in theme by doing panel.grid.major. I think it's .y. I always get x and y confused when it comes to these grid lines. And we'll then do element line. That worked, good. And now we see that it's a light gray, whereas theirs is a black thin line. So let's come in here and we'll do color equals black, and then size equals 0.25. I believe the default is 0.5. And I use size instead of line width. It works anyway with size, but it gives us this annoying warning message. So let's get rid of that. So those grid lines look nice. The next thing I want to think about is what to do with these y-axis labels, right? I really like having it on top of the grid line. I think that's kind of a cool look. And there's a couple strategies that I could see using to pull that off. One would be to get rid of the y-axis line and then to take the tick mark and make it the same thickness as the grid line and then extend it to the left. The problem with that I can see would be then that the number is going to be at the end of the tick, right? It's not going to be on top of the tick. And I could probably do some stuff with like vjust and hjust to kind of move the label to be on top of that line. So that's one idea. Another idea would be to do something I've done in previous episodes, which is to make my own y-axis. Basically to get rid of the line, the ticks, the labels, and to extend the grid lines by, as we accidentally saw earlier, changing the limit on the x-axis, right? To go back to the left further, and then to add annotation of these values on top of the lines. I think that's what I'm going to do because that'll be, I think, a little bit less hacky and ultimately will give me a little bit more control of what's going on. So let's give that a shot and we'll see how things go. So I'm going to start by coming in here and removing a lot of that y-axis stuff. And so we'll do axis.text.y equals element blank. We'll do axis.ticks.y equals element blank. Then we'll do axis.line.y equals element blank. So that gets rid of the y-axis. And so now we want to change the x-axis limits to give us enough space to put those numbers, right? And so I'm kind of excited about this. I think this is really cool. So again, we had up here in chord Cartesian our limits of 1 to 6. So let's take this to be, what happens if we do 0? Actually, you know what? I'm thinking about our segment here was negative 0.5. So let's see if we do 0 to 6, what that gives us for padding on the left side. So that gives us the padding, but I notice our annotation line down here was supposed to go to negative 0.5, but we're getting, it's not lining up, right? And I wonder if some of that might be because of the expand. So let's come back up and I think we can actually turn off the expand altogether. So we could do expand equals false. And then we can go ahead and remove the scale y continuous. And so that turns off all of the expansion and doesn't quite do what I want it to do. I think we want to change our limits on the x-axis here. And so why don't we go back up to chord Cartesian 6. Let's do 6.6. Okay, that's a little bit better. So let's also go back further to the left. And let's do negative 0.25. So I think we need a little bit more room. Let's go ahead and make that negative 0.5. And I think that gives us some pretty good space there. We're going to want to extend that line back to the left a little bit. And so we'll do that back up here with our annotate. Let's go negative 0.75. And then let's have the x end go to like 6.6. We can go back to the left a little bit. The right side looks pretty good. So we'll come back up here to that annotate. And let's do negative 0.9. That looks great. All right. So we now have the place to set our 4 different values on the y-axis. And again, we're going to do that with annotate. And because we've turned off that clipping, it's easier to figure out where the x positions are, right? And so let's come in here and we'll do annotate. And we'll do text as our geom. And then our x is going to be negative 0.5. And our y is going to be the 4 values, right? So it's going to be C 0, 20,000, 40,000, 60,000. And then we need a label. And for the label for now, I'm going to use the same thing as the y. And we'll make that look more attractive here in a minute. So let's go ahead and add that in. Great. Again, it's centered on the value. So we want to make it left justified and maybe vertically justified. So let's come back up here to where we had that annotate. And we'll do hjust equals 0, vjust equals 1. Oh, I think I want vjust equals 0. I get those confused. But hey, it's easy enough to experiment with and get things right. So now it's above the line, but it's like right on the line. So I think I want to move this up maybe like 1,000, right? Because it is at kind of the same plane. The 0 is the same plane as that $sign, right? And that was bumped up 1,000. So I'm going to come back up here to my y, and to that vector I can add 1,000, and that'll add 1,000 to all 4 of those values. So they'll all be the same increment above the line. That's great. Let's make the font a bit bigger as well as bold. And so again, we can come back up here and we'll then do face equals bold, and then size. Let's do, it's the same size as on the x-axis. And so what did we have down here for axis text x was 15. So let's do 15, and then we can do size.unit equals pt. It didn't like my unknown parameter face, and that's because it wants font face. I run into this problem frequently because in theme it's face, and in annotate or geom text it's font face. All right, I wish there was some uniformity there, but hey, maybe I should file an issue or a pull request. So I think that might be a little bit too big, so I'm going to knock that down a little bit. And again, we had 15, so let's make that 14. I think that's good. And I would like to format that text. And so we notice that the 0 doesn't have a $sign on it. And so I can't label it like I did for these values that are inside the bar. And so I'm going to come back up to my annotate here. And we'll go ahead and put this in quotes and do the $sign with the comma. And so I'll quickly go ahead and add that styling here. Not a big deal. There we go. Very good. Now we have our labeled y-axis. It does seem a little bit close to the bar. And so maybe we can move it off to the left just a smidge more. And so let's remember all the things we have to change to do that. So first, we need to change the limits. So let's make this negative 0.6. And then our x needs to be at negative 0.6. And I think that's probably going to do something to our annotate segment, but let's wait and see what happens first. So that gives us a little bit of breathing room here. But yeah, our line here did move over to the right. So I'm going to come back up, and I think I had it at negative 0.9. And let's make it at -1. Very good. And so I think we're at a pretty good place to stop here. I think we've done a great job of recreating the figure in ggplot2 that they made and whatever they use. The one thing that is different between my plot and their plot is the font, right? And so they're using fonts that they're probably getting from Google Fonts, whereas I'm using the built-in font, right? That is the serif for the sans serif font for my work. There's a package called Show Text that allows you to incorporate other fonts, like from Google Fonts or other sources that you could use to embed into your plot. I think this video is already getting long enough. We can go ahead and stop here. We'll revisit fonts in another episode. But I think, again, I've hit the big highlights of the various things that I wanted to call to your attention, and certainly the things that caught my eye the first time I saw this plot. Certainly putting the value inside the bar, vertically oriented as opposed to on top of the bar, was pretty cool. These tick marks, it seems that more and more when I look at figures made by other software than ggplot, they put the tick marks between the labels. Don't know why, but hey, that's what they do. Putting the labels on the y-axis on the grid line, I think is a pretty cool minimalistic look. And then also just the odd having a legend here when there's only one category. Like I said, I think that's odd, but hey, that's a challenge to see how we might implement that in ggplot2, as well as making the plotting symbol in that legend a circle, like a point, rather than a rectangle like you would expect for a bar plot like this. Well, that's all I've got for you today. In the next episode, I will be taking this data and reimagining it using a different type of plot and kind of implementing my own critique and solution to that critique, again, using ggplot2. So that you don't miss that episode, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel, tell all your friends what we're doing here, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Code Club.